Good morning, friends, colleagues, and warm greetings to you all from South Africa. I'm South African and I join you from Pretoria, South Africa. As Nadia mentioned, I'm Nadira Bayat and I'm the gender and trade expert working on gender mainstreaming amongst other issues as part of the African Trade Policy Center, ATPC. It's really such a pleasure to join you for the first webinar this year that has been convened on women and the AfCFTA and how women entrepreneurs can leverage the benefits of the AfCFTA. And while this may be our first formal engagement, it's really, colleagues, it's by no means our first. And in fact, it's going to be the first of many AfCFTA advocacy events. And I say this because, as we all know, the AfCFTA is historic and it marks a significant step in the continental integration process in line with the greats in Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela. It's in line with the Pan-African vision of one Africa. So as the socioeconomic program for inclusive and socioeconomic development of the continent, ensuring that the AfCFTA plays a powerful role, specifically in empowering women and advancing national and regional and global goals on gender equality and women's economic empowerment, really has to be at the heart of AfCFTA implementation. And particularly as women entrepreneurs, you really play a critical role. You're such an important constituency in driving and in championing this targeted approach that turns the transformative and what we don't want to be, but what is often the case, this aspirational potential of agreements and protocols and treaties, but we want to translate this into tangible progress for African women. But in order to be able to champion the agreement and to support its implementation, you need to understand the AfCFTA agreement. You need to understand what the opportunities are, you need to understand the challenges, you need to understand the operational structures, and that's why we're here today. So a big thank you to TFO Canada, our partners, for this invitation and for convening us today, and what we know is going to be the first of many engagements. And just to say at the outset that we may not get to respond to every question, but this is an open conversation, and it's a conversation that's going to continue. So we look forward to sustained engagement with you all as part of the process in driving this change for women under the AfCFTA. So if I could, I think I'm going to turn my video off now and yes, move to slide 2 on the learning outcomes. In terms of our learning outcomes, what we really want you to be able to do is to gain a basic understanding of the AfCFTA agreement and to understand how key provisions in the agreement could be leveraged to advance opportunities, and particularly in this case for women entrepreneurs. We want you to understand how the AfCFTA can advance economic and trade opportunities for women entrepreneurs, but also for women in different roles, for women as workers, for women as producers, for women as small-scale traders, informal cross-border traders, and of course for women entrepreneurs, for women managed firms in the formal sector, in the informal sector. And we want you to understand how a gender-sensitive approach to the implementation of the AfCFTA agreement, and particularly through a targeted and deliberate strategy of gender mainstreaming in AfCFTA National Strategies, can promote equality of opportunities for women in the AfCFTA. And when I conclude, I'm going to conclude particularly with just talking about the need for your engagement and how we can create that and how we can build on that. And I'm hoping as part of the discussions, you can also reflect on your personal experiences as part of regional and national policy processes and how you've managed to support and where you've not been able to support the implementation of regional agreements. Because a lot of this is lessons learned. What can we do better? What can we scale up? What can we address? Because when we look at the questions, and Mary, slide 3, please. We really want, Mary, can we just move to slide 3? Yes, we're talking about a business unusual approach because the AfCFTA cannot be business usual. It cannot be just an extension of commitments that can be aspirational, that, you know, it needs to be something different, and we need to be thinking more creatively. We need to be thinking out of the box. The AfCFTA is going to be implemented in the era of the fourth industrial revolution. What does this digital technologies, digital trade solutions, what does it mean? There has to be a different approach. So as part of your reflections at the end, you know, what does the AfCFTA mean for you, and what opportunities do you see the AfCFTA creating for your business? What gender-related barriers do you confront as a woman-owned or managed business? And what interventions can you identify in the context specifically of the AfCFTA, including technical assistance, skills development, and training to support you and your business harness these opportunities, these potential opportunities? Because it's about doing things differently. It's about a business unusual approach. It's about the AfCFTA and the need for us to do things differently. So we're really grateful for this opportunity. And I think with those opening remarks, I'm going to go to the first slide. So about the AfCFTA agreement, we have the framework agreement establishing the AfCFTA, which was negotiated from 2016 to 2018. The agreement was opened for signature at the 10th Extraordinary Summit of the AU Heads of State and Government in Kigali. And to date, we have 54 of the 55 AU member states that have signed and 30 have ratified. And the AfCFTA agreement officially entered into force on 30th May 2019. And I don't have up on the slide, but there are 5 operational instruments to support the operational phase of the AfCFTA. We have the rules of origin, there's the online tariff negotiation portal, there's the NTB barrier mechanism that we're going to talk a little bit about later, there's the African Trade Observatory, and the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. Now, as you all know, the start of trading under the agreement was set to commence on the 1st of July 2020, but it's been postponed as many things have in our lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been postponed. The start of trading has been postponed to January 2021. The scope of the agreement is very large. It requires AU member states to progressively remove tariffs on intra-African trade, making it easier for African countries to trade within the continent. It also creates a liberalized continental market for goods and services. And you may wish to look at the AfCFTA agreement that you can get online, or we're happy to share it with Mary. And that's really spelled out the objectives, the general and specific objectives of the AfCFTA as spelled out in Articles 3 and 4 of the AfCFTA agreement. Okay, I think go back. So the AfCFTA agreement covers trade in goods and services. It covers the upcoming negotiations on investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy, and other policy areas. And these include, amongst others, many others, trade facilitation and services, and many regulatory measures such as technical barriers to trade and sanitary standards. But again, we will share the AfCFTA agreement when we have more time, and you can look at it at your leisure. So Mary, if we can go to the next slide, please. So as I said, the scope of the AfCFTA agreement is huge. It's a single market that connects 1.27 billion consumers across 55 countries with an aggregate GDP of between 2.1 and 3.4 trillion US dollars. And of course, it's expected to bring considerable benefits to Africa. And in creating this one market, this one Africa for goods and services on the continent, the AfCFTA addresses the challenge that plagues our continent of small and fragmented African economies and markets, which makes it difficult for African countries to really leverage the benefits of international and global trade. But with the AfCFTA, this changes the game. Mary, slide 3. The architecture and key features of the agreement very quickly. There's the framework agreement that defines in general terms the purposes and intentions, establishes the primary definition and outlines its scope. There's the protocol to the agreement, trade in goods, trade in services, rules and procedures for settlement of disputes. Now, these were concluded as part of the phase 1 negotiations. As part of the phase 2 negotiations that will be concluded, we're going to go into negotiations on investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, and that's anticipated to be concluded by June 2021. E-commerce is also going to be integrated through the 3rd phase of the negotiations. And together with the agreement, there's the annexes, the guidelines, lists, and schedules to the protocols that articulate the protocols and the provisions that really flesh those out in greater detail. Mary? Very quickly, these are the potential benefits and the key features. So we're looking at full benefits of regional integration and advantages of market size. And we're happy to share the slides with you for you to look at this more closely, just in terms of the key features of these benefits and what that would entail, because businesses will no longer pay tariffs on a large variety of goods traded between African countries. You have the mechanism to report, monitor, and eliminate NTBs that constrain intra-African trade and by which women-owned businesses are disproportionately affected by. There's provisions on cooperation between customs authorities, on product standards and regulations, and a dispute settlement mechanism for the resolution of disputes between state parties in terms of the application of the agreement. There's also the integration into regional value chains, the establishment of regional value chains in which inputs are sourced from different African countries to add value before exporting externally. There's the promotion of trade in services across Africa by the gradual liberalization of services. Service providers will now have, following the negotiations that still need to start, they will have access to the markets of all African countries. There's mutual recognition of standards, licensing and certification of service suppliers, which will really make it easier and facilitate the ability of businesses and individuals to satisfy regulatory requirements of each other's markets. And of course, there's the industrialization of the economy. And we're going into the conclusion of phase 2 issues that will create a stronger and more conducive environment for recognizing African intellectual property rights, facilitating intra-African investment, and addressing anti-competitive challenges. Next slide, please. But what does this mean for you? I mean, in terms of opportunities for you as women-owned businesses, as women entrepreneurs, what does this mean for women across the continent in different roles? I've not gone into detail on what this means for women in different roles, but at a very high level, I think it's important to say that the AfCFTA will impact men and women differently, and it will impact them particularly differently in terms of their roles as women, as wage workers, as consumers, as taxpayers, as entrepreneurs of formal and informal enterprises, as small-scale traders. So it's important to know that there will be this differentiated implications and impact of the AfCFTA on women in their various roles. But really, this effective and successful implementation of the agreement can advance gender equality, particularly in terms of increasing economic opportunities and entrepreneurship for women-owned SMEs through boosting the demand for manufactured goods, given the strong emphasis on industrialization and structural transformation of African economies through the AfCFTA. The opening of borders to trade is going to advance the reconfiguration of regional value chains, by easing cross-trade of raw materials and semi-finished goods through the creation of regional value chains. There's also the expectation of larger export-oriented industries that can source suppliers from smaller women-owned businesses across borders. And of course, there's the possibility for small-scale farmers, the majority of whom are female, to connect to regional value chains that will support gender-inclusive development. And if we can go to the next slide, please. And we're really looking at women in their different roles. So intra-African trade can also help women by lowering the gender wage gap and can assist all workers in terms of increasing decent employment opportunities. In fact, there was this very recent World Bank study that says by 2035, wages for skilled and unskilled female labor would be 4.0% and 3.7% higher relative to baseline. And the effective full implementation of the AfCFTA on wages at the regional level shows that as a result of expansion of output in female labor-intensive industries, female wages would grow faster in all regions except for Southern Africa. But it's important to note that this comes with a caveat. It's not going to happen automatically. The benefits of the AfCFTA, the benefits of this huge market, the economies of scale that it creates will not just happen. It will not be rolled out. You know, there's still policies, there are regulatory environments, women in particular, and we'll be talking about that as we go through the presentation, and I'm sure it will come up as part of your reflections in terms of what complementary policies are required, because we all know that trade policies in and of themselves are not going to create these opportunities. You know, there is a need for targeted complementary policies in terms of education, skill development, bridging the digital gender divide, capacity building. There's a whole host of them, and it will be useful to hear as part of your reflections what do you think are those complementary targeted policies that can support the AfCFTA specific policies that will be developed to support effective AfCFTA implementation. The next prize, please. Okay, so multiple barriers that are confronting women-owned businesses. And as I said, despite the opportunities inherent in the AfCFTA, there are multiple barriers. And Aissatou, my colleague, will speak to it a little more as a practitioner, but we also want to hear from you what these barriers are, because it's really these barriers that you know better than I do that will prevent women entrepreneurs from leveraging the benefits and taking advantage of opportunities in this integrated continental market that we will be inheriting. Next slide, please. Okay, so in saying that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Aissatou Diallo, who will talk to the primary constraints, and we look forward to continuing the conversation about this as part of the Q&A session. Aissatou, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're listening from. My name is Aissatou. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm francophone. I'm from Senegal. And I have been building a growing interest on women entrepreneurs since my path cursed there is few years ago. And what I learned from interacting with you women entrepreneurs as part of the panel is that you have been the drivers, leaders of what is currently called economic intelligence or business intelligence, because you've been able to erase regional and transnational borders to supply from or supply national and regional markets. And really, to me, it's a pleasure to be part of this exciting panel. So we'll start first with the primary constraints women entrepreneurs face, and then move to exports-related constraints. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the primary constraint is access to land. We always talk about this women entrepreneurs in terms of access to productive means, but what is important first is have access to the land, because whether you are from a manufacturing sector or you are in agribusiness, land is very important. And despite the existing laws at the national level, customary laws tend to make access to land difficult, if not impossible. And besides what is the common understanding of women access to land, what we can note is that, or observe, is that land is what they call in French a patrimoine. So it's an asset. It's an opportunity for a woman to claim loans from banks, for example, a place where businesses and industries can be established, or extra money that can be used in case of unplanned setbacks or plans including children's education, for example. So when leased as well, land become an additional monthly income. And as you may have heard of the current situation with COVID-19, what is happening in the tourism sector in Kenya is that the Maasai women are really suffering from the impacts of COVID-19 in terms of tourism, because they have been leasing their lands to the tourists. So no tourists, no revenues, and of course they will have a negative impact in their lives, whether it's economic or social life. Next slide, please. Access to finance is the second aspect as well, because it allows to have access to greater market. And I will give an example related to the AGOA. Here in Senegal, we have women that are manufacturers in the fashion industry, or interior designer or handicrafts. And interviews with these women have showed that to meet the American market, some of them were forced to just not fulfill the orders because they're not capable of meeting the demand. For example, if you have a high demand of 1,000 pieces of one item, and you don't have the necessary funds to comply with those demands, first, you lose customers. And the second impact is that you face difficulties in terms of your own reputation, but at the same time, it's opportunities that are missing to have access to a bigger market. And these are constraints that can appear in terms of lacking access to finance. At the same time, have access to more funds allow women to have a bigger project, a better perspective in terms of business commitment, because you have the opportunity to sell your business. And sell your business, it's communication, it's advertising, but at the same time, it's this opportunity you have to travel to different markets. It's events, shows to just show your products and approach those markets. So access to finance is one of the primary constraints women face. Next slide. But there is also a lack of information, and what we can see, there is a platform that is called Exim Help Desk, and it's an European Union platform where you can have access to all the conditions and procurement procedures, requirements in terms of sanitary and phytosanitary standards, packaging, among others, to export to the European market. And these are platforms that are lacking, whether it's in West Africa or other parts of the continent, in terms of providing women with the necessary information they have to position themselves in a market. So supplying any market requires a perfect knowledge of the law of supply and demand, and having information on markets enables them to be met precisely the needs. So that would be one of the major challenges that has been shown in my fieldwork, is that multilingual platforms would be very interested because not all women speak French or English or Portuguese, whatever the country they are located in. So have access to a platform where I can have information in French and at the same time in Wolof here, which is the national language of Senegal, is something that is useful because I know that here I will know exactly how to position myself today as an exporter, but in the future to target bigger markets, the United States, or even the CEMAC countries or EAC countries, etc. and etc. Next slide, please. So access to training is another constraint, and it's more related to how we do business, in a sense that there are, when you see, for example, here in Senegal, we have APIX. It's the agents for the promotion of investments, and it's a one-shop place where, as an entrepreneur, if I want to open my business or expand my business, I can go and do all the necessary procedures to build my business or to change my business model. This is very interesting, and every year they provide a higher and higher number of enterprises being registered formally. But one of the reverse side of it is that there is a high number of companies and enterprises closing 1 year or 2 years after. And the major problem is that it's more difficult for women to have access to the necessary knowledge in terms of management. When we talk about management, we talk about finance. How do I have to run my business in terms of finance, advertising, communication, the supply chain, the stocking, and everything related to logistics. So this knowledge, women lack of having access to those technical knowledge, and going alongside with funding opportunities, the issues or the challenges might be the lack of necessary resources to hire consultants that are very expensive, or even hire employees that will require a higher amount of salary than low-skilled workers. Next slide, please. So alongside the primary constraints, we have the export constraints. And I just wanted to start with one example, and I think maybe the Francophone ones, or those who, the participants who are from West Africa have heard of the Nana bands. Well, the example of the Nana bands is quite interesting in the sense that they are from Togo, and there were women, they are still women. It's, I think, the third generation right now. They were powerful, economically powerful enough to lend to, the history says that when they were the first women to drive Benz cars, Mercedes-Benz cars, and that's why they're called Nana Benz. And economically, those women traders were extremely powerful in terms of not only local trade, but regional trade, supplying the West African market, but at the same time, transnational trade, because the wax they were selling were imported from Holland, and these are the first women who just implemented Vlisco in West Africa, the Vlisco brand. So when I really started to hear about those women, my question was, okay, how can you be so powerful to be the first to position within a regional market, and at the end of the day, not be capable of building transnational industries in the textile sector? And it was the very first moment I started to really be interested in women traders and do research. And what came out of my experience and field work is that most of the times the constraints are related to the communities in which we live first, but besides, in terms of business, cross-border, regional, and transnational constraints exist when it comes to women entrepreneurship. And I'm pretty sure that you will know more about it that I do, as you experience it more or less on a daily basis in your trading export activities. Next slide. So cross-border and regional trade, the first thing is we'll focus on the ECOWAS example. The ECOWAS has the protocol of free movement of goods and people, and it was signed in 1979. So this protocol allows me as an entrepreneur or as a citizen of ECOWAS to move me and my goods freely within the economic community, right? But the first challenges that are faced is infrastructure. Roads are non-existent in some areas, making travel difficult, long, and expensive, with consequences affecting goods transported. For example, there is a loss of perishable or fragile goods when traveling that require particular storage facilities, which means that if I have to export bananas, for example, in Guinea-Conakry, what happens is that I might face losses in terms of conserving those products that I'm carrying from Senegal to a neighboring country, just because of some challenges related to the infrastructure itself. So lack of infrastructure that connects properly the different trading centers or the capital cities of the communities of the continent itself. The second point is overlapping border control posts. And I'll just give you an example that might be faced here in West Africa, and I'll take the example of Senegal and Mali. Mali is a neighboring country, but it's a landlocked country, which means that the majority of the goods that are being imported in Mali go through the Dakar port or the Abidjan port. It's a landlocked country, which means that if I want to, for example, export to Bamako, most of the times it's by road. And what is noticed is that there is many border posts that I have to stop me and my goods within Senegal itself. And from the very moment I just reach Kidira, which is the trans-border post, I happen to face different controls from there up to Bamako. So I think it's exactly what's happening with Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso as well, that is I know that I've seen that there is a participant from Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso, which is a country that depends from Cote d'Ivoire in terms of access to the port, landlocked country, and such examples can be found as well in East Africa. And I know that there is maybe she's there, an Ethiopian participant, with this connection between Ethiopia and Djibouti in terms of transporting goods or exporting. You can't export if you don't have access to a port, but to have access to a port, it's many border posts, and it's really costly because at every border post, even if you have the right document, you might find yourself paying money to have your good continue its journey from one point to another. Language difference is as well one of the challenges, and I just give an example. West African region, you know that we have Portuguese, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau speak Portuguese. We have Anglophone countries and we have Francophone countries. And I think that one of the best examples, it's not because I'm from Senegal, but it tells the reality cross-border trade, the cross-border trade realities on the ground is that if you really want to move to the Gambia, which is an Anglophone country, or you want to go to Guinea-Bissau to supply the Guinea-Bissau market, which is a Portuguese-speaking country, what happens? Senegal is a Francophone country. So from the very moment you arrive to Ziguinchor, moving, which is one of the region connecting at the border side of both Gambia and Guinea-Bissau, is that suddenly you find yourself in a country speaking English or a country speaking Portuguese. And of course, what happens is that you find yourself coping with procedures. First, you don't understand the language, but you find yourself coping with procedures that, although we are in a common economic community, might differ from the country where you come from. Next slide, please. So another point is the control of community laws and regulations at the border. Despite the existence of a common protocol, challenges exist regarding its implementation at border posts. So the situation is due to linguistic challenges. I've said that later, right before, the lack of training of border officials. You must know that being a border official might be seen as a burden or as a punition. I don't find the word in English, I'm sorry. So most of the times, those who are at the border post are not well trained first regarding their home countries' regulations in terms of regional trade, but at the same time, the regional documents or the regional procurements traders must have to move from their country to theirs. So the lack of training of border officials code between laws of their own countries and those of ECOWAS. So trading becomes a guessing game in a sense that I don't know what I must provide until I reach the border, and if I'm lucky enough, I'll go through, which is really energy consuming in terms of trading, and especially for women, because it happens to be a psychological burden you have to carry with yourself, because you're not sure that the goods you're transported won't be returned, or they won't tell you, okay, leave the goods here and go to next region at the border to get the papers and come back, which can have impacts in terms of the goods conditioning. So women are the main actors in cross-border trade in its informal or small-scale dimension, but pay a heavy price because of limited knowledge on procedures to be followed, as well as the cost of moving goods from one member country to another. Port and sea entry level as well can become a burden for transnational exporters, in a sense that if I am a trader and I am located in Dakar and my market is both Senegal, but Mali as well, or Guinea-Conakry, or the Gambia or Guinea-Bissau, what happens is that I have different challenges coming together in one way, in a sense that I need to unlock the container from the port, which are different procedures that take time, that cost more money, and with a whole range of intermediaries between the moment I get, between the moment the container reaches the port and the moment I unlock the container and I stock it, and supplying those regional markets or trans-border markets. What happens is that first I have to deal with extra costs, infrastructures, challenges, and everything I've told you about since I started to talk about the export constraints. So it's double challenges. One of the other aspects as well, and I know that there are participants from Cameroon and Nigeria. What is very interesting is that, or maybe challenging at the same time, is that, for example, Nigeria is an Anglophone country, Cameroon is bilingualistic. But if I am a woman from Lagos and I want to trade with Cameroon, what exists, what happens is that we share the same borders, neighboring countries. But at the same time, what happens is that we don't belong to the same regional economic community. Nigeria is part of ECOWAS, Cameroon is part of the CEMAC. It's Central Africa, which means that the procedures, the laws and regulations change in a minute. from leaving one place to another, you just find yourself with different protocols, trade protocols. Okay? Next, please. So transcontinental level as well is an issue, and I think it's for the bigger exporters because here I've given the example of AGOA, but in 2012 with the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation, African countries were granted with the possibility to export 400 products scheme duty-free in China. I don't know if it has evolved since then, but it was in the action plan, the FOCAC action plan. The same comes with the AGOA. It's possible for traders to export in the European Union market, but what happens is that there are sanitary, phytosanitary measures, rules of origins, and other norms that traders must comply with beyond the requirements of, for example, the AGOA agreement. Exporters must also meet the demands of their buyers. So if you export in France, you must meet with EU standards, but at the same time, the French extra standards that has nothing to do with the EU ones. But if you're supplying, for example, Carrefour or Auchan, what happens that you have to meet at the same time the requirements of your customers, which is another burden that women traders might face in their trade. Next slide, please.
Okay, and I think yeah. So sorry, Aissatou, you want to just conclude on this then?
Yes, I was passing on to you to continue.
Okay.
Leveraging provisions
okay.
in the agreement.
Thank you for that, Aissatou. And I think it's important for Aissatou to have detailed the challenges and the gender-specific obstacles and trade barriers, because it helps to provide context. And when I go to talk a little bit about the AfCFTA agreement, and as you start reflecting on your personal experiences and obstacles and just restraints to your everyday business operations, you will be able to relate some and more of the challenges that Aissatou made reference to and contextualize it and apply the AfCFTA agreement and specific provisions in the agreement to those constraints. So moving on to the AfCFTA
Nadira?
agreement.
Nadira?
Yes?
Do you mind if I come in here just to ask for a participant share on reflections? I think we have Ama here from Ghana, who has been sharing some very interesting reflections on the chat, and I want to see if we can call on her to share for a minute or two about some of the ideas she had, and also to just ask the participants if it's all right with them. We'll run over time a little bit so that we can get in the important content about the provisions in the AfCFTA, and also so we can have some more time for participant sharing. So if that's okay with you, we'll run over time 10-15 minutes. And Ama, can you unmute yourself, please, and share your ideas?
Hello, I hope you can hear me. My
Yes.
name is Ama, and I run an e-commerce company called Market Express that sells fast-moving consumer goods and fresh produce. And 70% of the suppliers in this market are women. For the fresh produce, there are women who are aggregating fresh produce from Ghana, but also from neighboring countries. And for the fast-moving consumer goods, we have women who are distributors of major brands who have distribution networks. And one of the biggest things that I see, one of the biggest opportunities is for women-led sort of intermediary platforms like mine to facilitate making selling cross-border easier. We talk about e-commerce, but it's a little more than e-commerce, because once you've purchased online, someone must deliver it to you and you must receive the money. And so we offer sort of an integrated service where we deliver and the payment is processed, but it involves interfacing with different partners. And I see that if there are any women on the call that have more experience in the export space, that it's a time to think innovatively about how your business could not just sell its own things, but also be an aggregator or a platform, even if it's within only a specific commodity or value chain that enables others to also be able to sell. So that's on the first question that you asked about what does it mean to me and what opportunities do I see. In terms of the gender-related barriers, they are very similar to what has been shared already. But just like was shared, for women that do not have a formal education, the barriers are immense. And I wear another hat where I lead a network of social enterprises. And as we try and work with our suppliers and with the women that are in our programs, they face barriers connected with language, understanding, access to information, etc. And it'll be interesting as the country-specific implementation rolls out, how we actually incorporate voice, not just written material, so that women that are not educated can understand and participate. Once they understand, they are excellent business people, but the lack of information can be a significant barrier. So I'll just end there and thank you for the webinar and the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Amma. I mean, I think that those are really interesting and important reflections on the importance of innovation and on the fact that really, you know, as a women-led business, you are touching on so many areas of the AfCFTA, right? It's not just, as you said, e-commerce, it's trade facilitation, it's the cross-border payments issue, it's the access to information and markets. So I think it's a really important case study and your idea about using audio as well to address some of the barriers that had been addressed, that had been discussed earlier is really fascinating. So if others have comments, please write them in the chat. We've seen a couple more. I'll hand back over to Nadira to continue with the last part of the presentation, and we'll get to some more participant sharing.
Yes, absolutely. Very interesting and exciting initiatives and interventions coming from you, and also like the fact that it's very targeted. So when we're talking about, I hope you're still going to be here for the advocacy part and how, you know, we get this kind of messaging to policymakers to make sure that it informs these context-specific policies and interventions that we're talking about for women in various roles. And I like the sensitization aspect that you mentioned for women, particularly in the rural areas who might not necessarily have the same access to formal education. So lots of rich insights coming out from that, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Yes, so as I said, we are going to look very briefly, and I'm cognizant of the time and our constraints, but I do want to explain and to go through a little bit of detail, because it's all about the AfCFTA agreement. It's all about understanding it, and particularly how it could address the constraints and that you're confronting every day. So Mary, if we could just go to the next slide, please. Now, you know, we often hear complaints that, oh, but the AfCFTA agreement doesn't have a separate gender and trade chapter, and it doesn't go as far enough as some of the Rex treaties, and it's mainly aspirational. And my response to that is, it is what you make it to be. And it's not the responsibility of policymakers alone. And I think that's also part of this business unusual approach to AfCFTA implementation. It's the fact that there are these gender equality considerations in the agreement, but there are also other provisions that are not gender specific, but that can be used to enhance and advance economic empowerment opportunities for women, and we're going to look at that very quickly. But I'd like to first look specifically at gender equality considerations. So there's the preamble of the agreement that's aspirational, but does contain explicit reference to the importance of gender equality. So it gives us a sense of what the drafters of the agreement were thinking when they included an explicit reference to gender equality for the development of international trade and economic cooperation. We have Article 3E that emphasizes the need to promote and attain sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, gender equality, and structural transformation of state parties as one of the general objectives of the AfCFTA. And I think it's important to look more deeply at that, because you see here that the drafters made a connection between gender equality, socioeconomic development, and structural transformation. And they see very much that gender equality is central to the realization of socioeconomic development and structural transformation of African economies. You can't have an economy that does not have gender equality if you're talking about true, complete, comprehensive, inclusive socioeconomic development. So you do see that connection coming through. And then something more explicit in Article 27D of the Protocol on Trade and in Services that refers to improving the export capacity of formal and informal service suppliers, with particular attention to micro, small, and medium-sized operators and women and youth suppliers. So very specific gender-related considerations in the AfCFTA agreement. But we move on. Mary, next slide, please. We move on to other provisions that are not gender explicit, but that could be leveraged to enhance economic empowerment opportunities and to really push forward and propel new trade and business opportunities for women under the AfCFTA. And firstly, there's the customs cooperation, trade facilitation, and transit provisions. And these provisions simplify and harmonize customs and border procedures that would benefit women entrepreneurs and informal cross-border traders. And Aissatou spoke extensively on the disproportionate challenges faced by women in respect of these issues. And we see here how a gender-sensitive implementation to these provisions could facilitate trade. Because, as I said, the women tend to be disproportionately affected by trade documentation and other technical regulations and procedures at the border. So really having a very targeted gender-sensitive implementation to these provisions would help facilitate trade for women. And if we can move on to the next one. So here we have the AfCFTA online portal for non-tariff barrier monitoring, reporting, and elimination under Annex 5 of the Protocol on Trade in Goods. And this really tackles on the ground barriers that matter and that directly impact on micro, small, and medium-sized companies, informal traders, as well as youth and women business operators. And this mechanism provides this phenomenal opportunity for women-owned businesses confronting particularly acute NTB-related challenges to submit trade barrier complaints. So again, some strong innovation that's been created, and we can share the details of this mechanism that will be operated at the national level through nominated focal points and through the relevant recs to support the implementation of this NTB mechanism. Next slide, please. We also have provisions on technical barriers to trade, on SPS measures that cover mutual recognition of standards, licensing, and certification of services. And these provisions make it easier for small-scale traders and smallholder farmers, again, the majority of whom are women, to meet export standards and satisfy regulatory requirements. And these provisions can also help to address trade obstacles that remain particularly burdensome for female entrepreneurs, producers, and traders. And as you know, and we've spoken a little bit about it, these obstacles include the cost of complying with technical and sanitary standards, of obtaining certificates and of origin, of rules of origin, and other trade documentation. Next slide, please. And then we're looking at these technical assistance and capacity and training provisions in the AfCFTA agreement. And here, these provisions, a gender-sensitive approach, particularly in understanding what the needs of women-owned businesses are, can help to improve the export capacity and build the technical expertise, skills, and trading capacity of micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, and really empowering them to take advantage of new export opportunities arising from AfCFTA implementation. And here we see how training and capacity building can assist small-scale female entrepreneurs to formalize their businesses, to become small or medium export businesses, could really strengthen the quality of products while assisting entrepreneurs to form market links with regional and potentially international buyers at a later stage. So again, it's how do we interpret? There's nothing in the AfCFTA agreements that says this needs to support women entrepreneurs exclusively, but it's by lobbying your governments, and we're going to talk about that a little later in the presentation, in the conclusion, that enhancing a gender-sensitive approach to the implementation of these provisions is key to making them work for you as women entrepreneurs. And of course, inherent in the agreement are sensitive products and exclusion list provisions that will allow African countries to select specified number of tariff lines to be excluded from tariff liberalization on a temporary basis. And this is specifically in reference to specific products and sectors that are critical for food security, that employ a high number of women, in the event that women's businesses are affected by the influx of cheap imports through an integrated continental market. Next slide, please. But ultimately, friends, the responsibility for the implementation of the AfCFTA agreement lies ultimately with member states. It lies with your government. And the AfCFTA agreement provides considerable opportunities for socio-economic development on the continent. But as I said, there shouldn't be this assumption that these trade gains are just automatically going to be distributed. We shouldn't labor under that false assumption. And nor should we think that automatically it's going to translate into these higher levels of employment. Our governments need to adopt a targeted approach to ensure that we translate these opportunities into concrete socioeconomic benefits, but at the same time to prepare for potential risks and challenges that might arise. So how are we doing this? Mary, next slide, please. We're really doing this through AfCFTA National Strategies. We're looking at how do you maximize the benefits of the AfCFTA agreement. So we're doing this to AfCFTA National Strategies, and ECA has, okay, Mary, I think you, okay. I think we've lost our slides. Okay, I think maybe, you know, we're running past, we're running out of time, so it might just be better for me to tell you in a nutshell. So ECA is supporting African countries in developing a targeted approach to gender mainstreaming in AfCFTA national strategies in order to leverage the benefits from these strategies, because it's only through it's really only through a targeted approach that we're going to be able to do this. And women-owned businesses play a critical role in supporting this process of gender mainstreaming. And whilst it's African governments that need to interrogate what it is that will inform these policies and targeted measures, they need to do it in collaboration and in consultation with women entrepreneurs and with a variety of partners. So how do you do that, and what approach are we looking at? Well, we're really looking at we're looking at advocacy, and we're looking at these AfCFTA National Implementation Committees. Now, these committees are going to be led by the Ministry of Commerce and Trade. They'll bring together a wide range of stakeholders that includes representatives from the private sector and civil society, and women's business owners, and particularly through women's business associations or other organizations, play a critical role in conveying what a gender-sensitive approach to the implementation of provisions in the AfCFTA agreement should entail, because it's really your responsibility to draw the attention of policymakers to these critical opportunities and to what the gender-based obstacles that confront you are, because your voice needs to inform these policies. Now, how can we do that? Mary, the next slide. So you can really do that by being involved in the AfCFTA national policy processes. You need to identify your country's trade negotiator in AfCFTA negotiations, and you need to lobby for representation in AfCFTA national committees, because these committees will be formed to support the implementation of the agreement. There's also, you can also create an awareness and promote sensitization of the AfCFTA online NTB barrier mechanism. You have strong experience in trade facilitation, and particularly a gender-responsive trade facilitation that builds on best practice and that improves the safety and reduces the costs and time involved in trading. Again, participation in consultations with government, highlighting what the actual and the potential impact of liberalizing trading services would be on US female entrepreneurs. And of course, we spoke about defining capacity building and technical assistance and training needs to support women entrepreneurs harness the opportunities in the AfCFTA. Because ultimately, your voice in defining what these priority needs are. If we can go to the questions, please, Mary. On the last slide. Your voice in responding to these questions is really the voice that will make business in the AfCFTA unusual, because your voice is crucial to defining what your priority needs are. Your voice is crucial to defining what your concerns are and what it is that's required for you as women entrepreneurs to exploit these potential new and economic opportunities. So thank you again to TFO Canada. Thank you again to all of you. We've run out of time, but as I said, this is the first of many conversations, and we look forward to being the interface between you and policymakers, engaging directly with you, and making sure that together we transform what could be potentially aspirational under the AfCFTA to drive lasting change for women on the continent. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadira. I was hoping to get a couple more participants in to share, but maybe I'll just summarize some of the feedback, which reflected on some of the barriers that were mentioned, and also raised the issue of digital barriers, which is something that we are looking at closely in the coming months. But there are some suggestions as well. So recognition of the information sharing as an important tool, and also Angela brought up the interesting point about there's not many women to network with who own large companies or who are entrepreneurs that are exporting, and so business networks are small. And so this is one of the ways that we're hoping we can also forge some connections between all of you as participants who are interested in exporting under the AfCFTA or trading under the AfCFTA, and making connections with each other across the continent. We're very thankful for your participation in this webinar. If you have any questions, please share them, and we'll do our best to reply to them following the webinar. Mary, maybe I can pass it back to you.
Great. So thank you so much to Nadia, Nadira, and Aissatou for your presentation this morning. We certainly learned a lot, and I'm just going to remind everybody that you can respond to our survey. We're going to send you a survey monkey for you to answer, so that you can give us more feedback on how you would like to continue this conversation. And here at TFO Canada, we are hoping that we can contribute in the ways that have been outlined today. It's business unusual. I love that coined phrase, and I hope you may have already trademarked it. Otherwise, I'm sure it's going to be picked up like wildfire on social media. So it's business unusual. And this opportunity, as Nadira said, being on this cusp of the largest free trade area ever, likening it to these momentous occasions. She linked it to the names of two very strong male leaders coming from the African continent. And wouldn't it be great if this new movement is heralded by strong women leaders, and we associate women exporters at the forefront of this important moment that we are at with the emergence of this free trade area. TFO Canada will be supporting in some of the ways outlined. We certainly will be helping with strengthening capacities. Thank you for mentioning the importance of accessing trade regulations at the national level. That type of information is already available on the TFO Canada website for Canada, but we know how important it is to have it for each destination market that you may be interested in for your products and services. TFO Canada will be working with trade support institutions to help them get that information in place. There's an opportunity for us to harness technology, as Nadia has mentioned. Certainly there must be brilliant young women and men out there developing apps that would help us translate that information into local languages and use the audio options that we don't necessarily need to have those formal education skills that are lacking amongst some of the women that we really hope that we can bring into these new opportunities. So a lot of food for thought, particularly from TFO Canada. We are delighted to have this opportunity with the African Trade Policy Center to bring you this webinar, and we hope that you will continue to look at our website for upcoming webinars. We have one on digital skills at the end of this month that will be delivered in French, and of course the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement webinar that you heard this morning will be delivered in French as well in October. So once again, thank you, Nadia, Nadira, and Aissatou, and for my colleagues at TFO Canada, Olivier and Harry, and all of our friends in the background with the trade support services. And we wish you a happy afternoon or evening, wherever you are in your time zone. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you to everyone, and we look forward to staying in touch and staying engaged.
Thank you.
Thank you.